Okay, here we are again. It's week 7 now. This is British and American culture. And for a long time, we have neglected the half of the name of the course. It's British and American culture, but for various reasons thus far, the first 6 weeks, we've focused on British culture, which really was derived from Scottish and English and Welsh and Irish culture to a certain extent. So up until now, I've tried to give you the background that you need because obviously the British culture is a much older, it has a much longer history and it was founded much earlier than the American one. And the American culture itself is derived from the English. And this is a great time to introduce America because we just finished talking about the 17th century and the conflicts that occurred in the 17th century spill over into the 18th century and in a lot of ways prepare the culture in America for its violent separation from the British, empire, the British parent culture. So, in some ways, the people that were on they were on the winning side, as I explained. The Puritans, Oliver Cromwell, they were on the winning side initially in the Civil War, but with the Restoration and the Glorious Revolution, the basically conservative nature of British culture asserted itself and it stabilized, and that left very little room in that culture for the people we call the Puritans. Anybody who was radical and not moderate, because going back to Queen Elizabeth, one of the things that really marks a difference between American culture and British culture is the fact that the revolutions in British culture are always sort of controlled. And that's why the French Revolution gets studied a lot more than the English Civil War, because they did go through a revolutionary decade, but then, or 2 decades you might say, 20 years about in total, where they experimented with a republic, but then they immediately withdrew from that and settled in some sort of compromise. And that's one of the reasons why I keep telling you about Queen Elizabeth and why I think she's just deserves to be called Queen Elizabeth the Great, because she is very indicative. She's a very talented individually, but she just is she characterizes the whole culture of Great Britain and how the most successful leaders in United Kingdom normally are ones that are not super radical. Winston Churchill or the Duke of Wellington or whoever you want to choose, Nelson, military leaders, political leaders, they are extreme and they push the culture, but they're quite conservative. They kind of try to keep the tradition of the British culture and the English culture going. That will not be true in the same way of the people that decide to leave and go to America. Now, we're going to talk about Columbus, but before we do, I think we'll do Columbus in part 2 of this week's lecture. But first of all, I just want to talk about, American culture in general, because we need to warm up a little bit instead of jumping right into it. So this week we're going to talk about colonial America, and we're going to talk about the American Revolution. And that's a lot of stuff to cover because there are whole classes about the American Revolutionary War and there's 2 names, the American War of Independence. It's the same thing. We're going to focus a lot on 1776, but for now, we just want to talk about American culture in general and what makes it American. So on my board behind me here, as usual, I've tried to give you some main points. Just like when I talk about the Reformation, or I talk about the Black Death, or I talk about the 17th century, I just try to give you, I know I'm throwing a lot of material at you, but if nothing else, if with the hour and a half I usually speak to you these days, which would be normal in class, we would normally have almost 2 hours together every week on Thursday, that you could sort of, all the details that I give you, I want you to remember as much as possible. And as I said, dates and names are not as important as these things, the concepts, and can you explain them? So if I say on the exam, I say, I ask you a question, please tell me about the main ideas about American culture that persist through all of, its 250-year history. This is what I'm asking for. So I'm going to, and it's the same thing, the same kind of question could arise about, the first 1,000 years of British history. I ask you for your assignment to talk about one of those invasions, but I could say to you, tell me about the first 1,000 years of British history. And you would have to say, well, originally there were some Celtic people there and they did this and that, and this is the way their culture was. And then the Romans came and they did this and it changed this way. And then the Anglo-Saxons came and they changed, this is what they did. The language changed and they changed the culture like this. And then the Vikings came and they did another thing. And finally the Normans did. That's really the end of the 1,000 year period that we talked about first. Those questions, you can expect those questions to be on the exam. As you know, we do not have a midterm, so you can expect these questions to come up on the exam. The exam is composed of multiple choice questions that get you to choose the correct answer that matches. It'll be a question or a scenario where you have to choose the right answer. Some of them are a little bit tricky, but most of them pretty straightforward, so you need to know your stuff. And then the last part, the second section, part B, will be based around these things. So remember, normally we would have a midterm next week, but we do not. So we're going to probably do a graded assignment instead. But anyway, that's the format of the midterm and the exam. Most of the questions are multiple choice, but then there's a second section. If you look right down at the bottom of the page, the website, you can see the breakdown. It's roughly 70% multiple choice and 30% short answer. This is short answer stuff, and this is the harder part, so you need to know this stuff. So the United States of America, when did it really start? They celebrate Columbus Day, and we'll talk about Columbus next time. 1492 would be the earliest possible date, I suppose, of dating America. It's not a country, though. 1776 is when it becomes a country. It doesn't become a country, actually, until the end of the war, 1783. That's kind of a trick question. But they date their independence from when, they declared war and they formed a Continental Congress in 1776. But some people have now pushed it back because there were Europeans coming over, Columbus being the first wave, very small wave, and larger waves of people coming until now, until today. So we will talk about all that stuff and how, there was already millions and millions of people living in the Americas, North and South, and what happened when there was this collision between what we call the Old World and the New World, but that's kind of a ridiculous way to talk about it. East and West doesn't even make sense because it depends on what part of the world you're in if you want to call it East and West. Obviously, Western Europe isn't as west as North America if you're going that direction. Anyway, just calling it the Americas is how I'm going to deal with that problem. I'll just refer to it as North America usually. So these people came from southern and southwestern Europe first, the Portuguese and the Spanish. Actually, Columbus was Italian. He was Genoese. He was from Genoa. And he would make his way over in 1492, and that set things in motion. The English are very late, though. And like I said, King James was the one who really successfully ruled over the efforts to start colonies in Virginia. And that started in 1607. And there were some failed attempts before that. So the Spanish and the Portuguese are easily 100 years ahead of what the English are trying to do. And that, again, will be talked about next lecture. So let's just talk about the Americans in general. A lot of people go to America because they're trying to escape another place. They're trying to find a place where they can be free, right? This is something you can see from the very beginning until now, where Americans really, really can't seem to, even when it's necessary, coronavirus being the current example, even when it seems to be a matter of life or death, they just cannot abide by, restrictions and general rules, that they have to be independent, and they take their freedom so seriously that you see right now in Michigan and all over the place, you see groups of people protesting various things against all of the rules that the government is imposing. And some of them are carrying around guns just in case some police officers or military or government officials or anybody tries to force them to behave the way everybody is being advised to. If force comes into play, they're going to defend their freedom with their life, violently with their life. And it's very shocking to other countries that they would do this, but it's not to me. It's not surprising to me that they won't give up their guns. Many Americans, even my friends who are American, a lot of them are reasonable. There's terrible gun violence that happens all the time. And why do Americans insist on allowing people the freedom to have those weapons when the demand and the original situation for their use is sort of not present anymore? It's because they're always concerned that somebody might take away their freedom, okay? And this is the people, they even want the freedom to be unfree. This is a direct quote from a really great professor that I've listened to his lectures. He's from Eastern University. His name is Dr. Alan Gozel. I think his name is the correct pronunciation. You don't have to know these people's names. I'm just letting you know that not all these ideas are originally mine, because they're not. But I'm reflecting on this and what he said. And the fact that these things are fundamental to the behavior of an American person, no matter where they originated, but the people that come, wherever they come from, they may want to come to America to be a part of a system that's we would consider repressive. And the Puritans are like that, right? The Puritans don't want anybody to work on Sunday. They don't want to celebrate Christmas. They don't want to have any fun. They don't want anybody to use bad language. They want the freedom to come to America and have a more restrictive society, because they can't do it in America. They can't do it They can't do it in England. So they make their way to the Netherlands, and the Netherlands just doesn't, they're growing up, and the environment of, there's too much variety. Basically, in the Netherlands 400 years ago was one of the most cosmopolitan places in the world. It's the center of the Dutch Empire, and there's traders and there's people from all over Europe and all over the world, really, at least exchanging ideas and goods and stuff in, Amsterdam and other cities in the Netherlands. And the Puritans don't like this. Their children are growing up and they're worried that they're going to lose the manners and the focus on the religion and the word and the behavior. They're just going to grow up and they're going to learn different languages and they're going to choose a different version of Protestantism. So they leave and they go to America and they establish new colonies. In the famous one is Plymouth. And we're going to talk about this next time. But this is all how we get these things. I can talk to you about yesterday with people protesting with guns saying, just let us out. We don't want to stay in our houses. We want to have the freedom to go out if we want. Don't make us don't make us social distance. Don't try and tell us what to do. I have a big gun. Stay away from me because I'm preserving my freedom. And you can go right back to the very first group of people on the Mayflower, not the very first group, because Virginia is another story, but the very first group of this type of people that comes to America and believes that that's where they're going to have the freedom to live the life that they want, and nobody can stop them. That's American freedom from the beginning to the end. Now, I should explain, I think, from what I've read, and I'm not American, remember that, but I've been studying American literature, I've been to America, I can't count the number of times, and I have probably as many American friends in Korea or more than I do Canadian. So I'm well exposed, although I am Canadian. But some parts of America, some people in America are more like Canadians, and some Canadians are more like Americans. It depends on where you live. I happen to be, from the Toronto area, so we're definitely the people on the other side. In Michigan, have some things in common with us, and one of them is just loving hockey and cold winters and a similar accent. But there are other things that are different. But anyway, this idea that I'm talking about, some of these things really come from this certain group of people that has come to dominate American culture quite strongly. There's always this dominant culture, counterculture, subcultural, mix. People sometimes call Canada a mosaic because it's so, they believe the cultures are kind of distinct and like put together in some kind of design, and that American culture is a melting pot. But I really think that's a terrible metaphor, because they're not melted together. They're not. The people from Texas, the people from California, the people from Washington, the people from Virginia, in Florida, in New York, in Ohio, are completely different. I mean, they have some things in common, and these are the things they have in common, but some of these things are really the influence of, this core group of people that sort of led the American Revolution with their protesting and their effort. Boston in particular, and Massachusetts being the strongest, people that were driving forward this effort to be different than the United Kingdom and not be constrained by the British Empire. So this brings us to this education opportunity idea. The best way I can describe this quickly is by saying, basically, this is the American dream. Education is the key to unlocking that dream. I mean, you can say, a pro athlete is not educated, but a pro athlete also trains. And so if you're Michael Jordan and you didn't go to Harvard, you still are one of the most successful Americans ever, because you had skills and you went to school and you were able to apply them and train. And he is an intelligent person. He's not necessarily a bookworm or able to give speeches like a professor or Steve Jobs, but the man is incredibly wealthy and successful, and it doesn't matter what aspect. You can just call this training or education or opportunity or whatever it is, but if you're an American, you believe that you can be what you want to be, right? If I could be like Mike, I dream, I groove. There's a commercial. I'm going to have to link this if I can remember. I think that's a Gatorade commercial. Anyway, Michael Jordan, that's just my off-the-cuff example. But education opportunity, it's really, at its root, it's what we call the American dream, right? Now, the third thing is manifest destiny, and I use that word because I want you to remember what it is. Manifest destiny is what the Puritans believed, that they were basically, God was a Protestant Englishman. God was not Catholic. The Catholics had it wrong. The Mormons have it wrong. Islamic people have it wrong. Everybody has it wrong. Spanish people have it wrong. The only people that really know who God is are the Protestant Englishmen. And a lot of them come to believe this. The Spanish Armada failing, and all the success that England enjoys, defeating the French, more often than losing, for example, just reinforces this idea. When James II, who is Catholic, tries to stop William, and the wind blows down the channel and prevents James's superior military from stopping the ships, the Dutch ships, from landing. They call it a Protestant wind, and they say this is what it's supposed to be. This is manifest destiny. So the Americans, who will become the Americans, the Puritans and the English people who arrive, they believe this in all things, that they are special, that they've been chosen by God. They're a chosen people, and they're going to create this great. It's going to be hard. They're going to have to work hard, but eventually they'll create this thing that will be the light of the world. I don't think he's actually a minister. He's not actually a pastor. I think he's a lawyer. But there's a early colonist who gives this famous sermon essentially, and he calls the effort to create a colony in America a city on the hill. And that means you're looking up at a city that's glowing, and that you desire to be there, and it's the light of the world, and it's special, and it's going to lead everybody, and they're going to create something great that everybody will recognize as being special and exemplary and exceptional. That's what they think, right? So he does the sermon does emphasize that it's going to be hard, but that's what God wants you to do. Work hard. That's what Americans need to do. That's manifest destiny. Eventually, we're going to be the most powerful country in the world. And they did. So it's kind of, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that when the English believed in themselves, that's why they kept thinking, well, we must be right because we keep winning. So it's a cycle of confidence. And obviously, eventually, it's going to run out. But there's other cultures in the world who have also had this feeling. And, the English are no exception. Ideas and beliefs there. Essentially, ideas and beliefs mean that the culture of America is not based around a race. Although there is racism, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that. It's not an ethnicity or a race. There's no such thing as, if you said Anglo-Saxon for the English, at a certain point there was some validity to that there would be only 99%. If you said that about Koreans too, I know genetically Koreans are very mixed too. You'll have ancestors from all over Asia. If you go back far enough, there's going to be Mongolians and Japanese and Koreans and Chinese. You're all going to have mixed blood if you go far enough. But in America, you don't have to go back at all. You go, your father is Irish, your mother is German, and your grandmother and grandfather are from here and there, and some people are a quarter Irish and a quarter. I'm also like that too. Lots of people, somebody told me, I don't know if this is true or not, somebody told me that Obama had an Irish ancestor, and the joke is that everybody has an Irish ancestor in America because there are millions and millions of Irish people, and a lot of them have mixed up. So you can't say what is an American. An American is a race. It's not. That's just a false attempt to divide people. When Donald Trump does that kind of stuff, he's taking advantage of people's ideas. Donald Trump is descended from the Drumpfs. He's German. Not all of his ancestors are German, certainly, but his family name from his father's line was altered from Drumpf to Trump. And who cares what he is? If he's German or English, doesn't matter. He's an American, but so are all the black people, all the Asian people, all the South Americans, Hispanics, the people from Central Asia, the Russians, everybody. I'm not naming everybody because there are Americans from every single country in the world, every single one. So it's not based on a race or an ethnicity. America is based on this belief in democracy, belief that the people should govern, not a king. There's never in any history, people are the one thing that everybody sort of even the people who like Trump, and there's lots of them, he's popular amongst a lot of people. The people who like Trump, sometimes, he seems like he wants to be more of a dictator, but he never says it because he's American. He probably wants it, and there's probably, maybe JFK wanted to be a dictator sometimes. Maybe Abraham Lincoln just felt like, well, some days the American people are so difficult, I just wish I could take a hammer and bang the hammer, the gavel, on the desk and make things happen, just like a dictator does. But they never do it, and they usually don't say it. And if you say it, you want to be a king, then, George Washington's going to rise up from his grave and say, they offered it to me. They said I could be king. I turned it down because I know what America means. America is a system of, it's a belief in a certain system, which is the people govern the country. They may fight each other all the time politically, but they really never look for somebody to have absolute power, so far. I hate to think that it would change, because I think this is one of the greatest things about American culture, is that they really, if somebody tries to be a dictator, even in another country, they often resist that person. If anybody tries to make America change the system, that means war. That's it. That's not going to happen. So it's really all of these things you can see. The first four are really fundamental to what it means to be an American. The last one there is contradiction, and that's my personal favorite, and I've been teaching this idea since the very beginning. One of the reasons that there's so much revolutionary activity in the United States, in the protesting and everything else, is because they try all the time to do everything. They try to be unified but be separate. The whole idea of this United States of America thing is a contradiction to begin with. Like, they're supposed to have a central federalized government, but the states are supposed to have autonomy at the same time. And you can see these things they just sometimes don't work very well, With the coronavirus, Donald Trump's saying every state should do their own thing. And then every state is saying, we want to do our thing, but we want money and support from you. And which is it? If it's going well, then everybody wants to take the credit. And if it's not going well, then everybody wants to blame. So it's just a blame game, really. It's up to you to decide, especially if you're American, who is actually to blame. But that's not really the point. It's just the fact that there's always this tension between the political power of the states and how much they should be separate and how much they should be attached to the federal government. And a lot of people not everybody, a lot of people feel that the American government shouldn't have too much power, in that they should preserve the autonomy of the states. And that goes right back to the beginning as well. So we're going to talk about that in the next part 2 also. Another good example is healthcare, right? They have the best healthcare and the worst. You can see that because some people have access to these amazing doctors and these fantastic hospitals. And, people had this perception that if there was a pandemic, America would be fine because they have such great equipment and so much money and these fantastic hospitals. But most people, if there's enough people infected, there's just not enough of it. Poor people aren't covered. That's why Bernie Sanders gets traction, not anymore, but a lot of the issues on the Democratic side were related to healthcare because a lot of people, they have an amazing healthcare system for some people, but not everyone. Freedom is a contradiction too because, there's several million people in the United States who are in jail. Can you have a country that has the most independent, behavior and the most free, culture, and also have, one of the highest percentages of people that are incarcerated in jail in the world? Like, they have a higher percentage than China or North Korea. It's a shocking thing if you don't know that. The prison system in America is incredibly oppressive, and that means there's, something like less than 1%, but there's 2 million people at any given time in America that are in jail serving time, and they're not free at all. Their liberties have been it's been taken from them. They can't vote and they can't leave, and they have criminal records, and their lives have been, in many ways, their rights as a citizen have been taken away. Free and not free. That's a contradiction. So that's the final point for today. So I know I sometimes speak quickly. I'm trying to speak clearly. Remember, the subtitles are along the bottom. Use them and pause it if you need to, and make notes as you go and you listen to me. I hope that these kind of explanations are helpful. Again, this is the most important thing to focus on. The textbook is going to be very helpful to back up the next two parts, but this is what you need to know. I've explained it in a lot of detail, so hopefully this helps you remember and understand what these things mean. If there are questions, like the excellent question that I had in part 3 last week, email it to me and I'll handle it in the next 2 parts when I record them later this week. There is no assignment for this week. I'm going to catch up and try to give people feedback for the assignments that we've done so far. So we'll definitely not have an assignment this week. So you can rest easy, but study the stuff that I'm telling you and keep up, because you won't be able to catch up if you try and study a few nights before the exam. It's not going to work out. So pay attention to these lectures and keep up on your cyber lecture activity. Okay? Thank you very much for listening. That's the end of part 1 in the Introduction to America. I will see you again later in the week. Have a good night.